"Get out of my gym." Those were the first words Jonah Mercer said to Taryn Osei-Bonsu the moment she walked through the door. Not hello, not can I help you. 4 words delivered like he was shooing a stray dog off his porch. Taryn stopped walking. Her duffel bag, the same one she'd carried through 2 deployments, 1 counterterrorism rotation in Djibouti, and a medical discharge she never fully accepted, hung off her left shoulder. She looked at Mercer. She looked at the 2 men flanking him, both in red competition rash guards, both with that particular expression men wear when they think they already know the ending of a story. She said, "I'm sorry?" Mercer crossed his arms. He was about 6'2", broad through the chest, the kind of man who'd been the biggest person in every room he'd ever entered, and had quietly organized his entire personality around that fact. He was a 3rd-degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He ran Irongate MMA out of a converted warehouse in Clarksville, Tennessee, and he had, in the past 11 years, produced 4 regional champions and 1 minor UFC prospect who flamed out in the prelims, but whose photo still hung framed beside the water fountain. "You've got the wrong place," he said. "Yoga's down the street." The 2 men behind him, Davis Pruitt and a guy everyone called Satch, whose real name was probably on a birth certificate somewhere but rarely came up in conversation, laughed. Not the loud, theatrical laugh of men performing cruelty for an audience. The quiet, comfortable laugh of men who'd done this before and expected no consequences. There were maybe 20 people in the gym that morning. Some were stretching. Some were mid-drill. A few had stopped to watch, the way people stop on a sidewalk when they sense something is about to happen and can't make themselves look away. Taryn Osei-Bonsu was 29 years old. She'd grown up in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Fort Bragg country, Army town, a place where the sound of helicopters at 2 in the morning is just background noise, and nobody asks what your dad does for work because they already know. Her father had done 22 years in the 82nd Airborne. Her older brother had done 8 before a roadside device outside Mosul took 3 fingers from his right hand and most of his hearing in his left ear. Taryn herself had spent 6 years as a combat medic with the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, which is the unit that doesn't appear in press releases and whose personnel are instructed, if asked at cocktail parties, to describe themselves as Army Support Staff. She had pulled 2 men out of a burning helicopter in Kandahar Province in 2019. She'd been awarded a commendation she wasn't allowed to publicly discuss. She'd done hand-to-hand combatives training for 6 straight years under instructors who had no interest in sport and every interest in outcome. She had, on 3 separate occasions, been the smallest person in a room where violence was a genuine possibility and had walked out of all 3 rooms under her own power. She had moved to Clarksville 4 months earlier after the discharge, partly because her brother lived there, partly because she didn't know where else to go, and partly because she was trying, with mixed results, to build something that resembled a normal life. She'd found Irongate online. She'd emailed twice. Nobody had responded, so she showed up. She looked at Mercer for a long moment. "I emailed," she said. "Twice." "We're selective," he said. Davis Pruitt had drifted closer. He was grinning in a specific way, not at her, really, but at the situation, the way a man grins when he's watching someone else be embarrassed. "Delective," he repeated, like he enjoyed the word. "She's here for the pole dancing," Satch said. A few people in the gym laughed. Not many, but enough. Here's the thing about moments like that. There are 2 kinds of people in the world. The kind who, when publicly humiliated, feel their face go hot and their hands start shaking and their minds scramble for the right words that never come fast enough. And the kind who go completely still. Taryn went completely still. "Can I use the mat?" she said. Mercer looked at her like she'd asked to borrow his car. "You're serious. I can pay the drop-in rate. Your website says $35. Our website also says intermediate experience required. I have experience." Pruitt laughed again. What kind of experience? Zumba. Satch said something under his breath. The people within earshot thought it was funny. Mercer studied her for a moment, with the detached curiosity of a man who has already made his decision and is only watching to see how long the other party takes to realize it. Then he stepped aside and gestured toward the mat with a kind of theatrical magnanimity, the gesture of a man extending what he considered an enormous favor. 5 minutes, he said. Show me what you've got. He meant it as a dismissal. He expected her to fumble through a few moves he could critique loudly, give her a sympathetic shrug, and send her out the door with just enough plausible deniability that it wasn't technically discrimination, just standards. He'd done it before. Davis Pruitt had done it before. Irongate ran the way it had always run, the way Mercer wanted it to run, with the people Mercer wanted in it, and that list had never included women who showed up unannounced on a Wednesday morning with a duffel bag and no introduction. He pointed to Pruitt. Davis, give her a round. Pruitt stepped onto the mat with the relaxed confidence of a man who does not consider what is about to happen to be a real fight. He outweighed Taryn by at least 60 pounds. He'd been training for 9 years. He had a shelf of competition medals in his apartment, and he was the kind of man who made sure guests noticed it. He bounced on his heels a little, loosening up, smiling at her. "Don't worry," he said. "I'll go light." She looked at him. 22 seconds later, Davis Pruitt was flat on his back on the mat, with his right arm extended at an angle that arms are not supposed to reach, and Taryn's weight positioned such that if she applied 1 additional pound of pressure, he would need reconstructive surgery. He tapped. She released. She stood up. The gym was very quiet. Satch had stopped smiling. Mercer had not moved, but something in his face had changed. Not respect, not yet, maybe not ever, something more complicated. The expression of a man who has built his identity around a certainty and just watched a crack run through it. He said, "Lucky." She said nothing. He said, "Satch, get on the mat." Satch, whose actual name was Leo Hutchinson, and who held a second-degree black belt, and who had twice placed second at the regional IBJJF tournament, approached with considerably more seriousness than Pruitt had. He rolled his neck. He watched her. He was no longer making jokes. He lasted longer than Pruitt. 31 seconds, to be precise. The finish was a rear naked choke applied so efficiently that Hutchinson barely had time to register that the position had shifted before his hand was slapping the mat. He got up slowly. He didn't say anything. He walked to the edge of the mat and stood there with his hands on his knees, breathing. Mercer looked at Taryn. She looked back at him. Now here is the part that almost no one who wasn't present in that gym will ever understand, and the part that matters more than the submissions. Mercer walked onto the mat himself, a third-degree black belt with 11 years of running his own gym. A man who had built his reputation on the premise that he knew exactly who belonged on his mat and who didn't. He walked out there because he had no other option that didn't involve admitting something he was not prepared to admit. He had 50 pounds on her. He had more years on the mat than she'd been an adult. He had ego, which is its own form of ballast. He lasted 47 seconds. The room had been quiet before. Now, it was the specific quiet of people who have witnessed something they will describe for years, who are already composing the story in their heads, who understand that they are on the correct side of a before and after. Taryn stood up. She didn't celebrate. She didn't say anything sharp or satisfying. She picked up her duffel bag from the edge of the mat, unzipped it, took out a water bottle, drank from it, and looked at Mercer. "I'd like to train here," she said. Mercer was sitting on the mat. He was going to have a bruise on his left shoulder that would last 2 weeks, and a specific humiliation that would last considerably longer. He looked at her for a moment. His face was doing something complicated. Before he could answer, a woman named Bev Hollis, who had been watching from the far side of the gym. She had been training at Irongate for 6 months and had endured her own version of Mercer's welcome, began to applaud, not enthusiastically, steadily, The way you clap when you are making a point. 2 other women joined her. Then a man who'd been on the rowing machine. Then slowly, a few more. Mercer said nothing. He got up off the mat. He walked to his office, which was a plywood room in the back corner of the warehouse, with a window that looked out onto the main floor. He closed the door. He did not come back out for 40 minutes. Davis Pruitt, to his credit, and I want to be clear that this is not a large amount of credit, but it is the amount he earned, waited until Mercer was gone, and then walked over to Taryn and extended his hand. She shook it. He said, "Where did you train?" She told him. Army combatives, 6 years, then 2 years of jiu-jitsu she'd been doing quietly at a small dojo on the other side of Fayetteville that Mercer had probably never heard of. Pruitt nodded. He didn't apologize exactly, but he had the decency to look ashamed, which is sometimes the first step. Satch, Leo Hutchinson, didn't say anything to her. He left 15 minutes later. He wouldn't come back to Irongate for 2 weeks, and when he did, something in the way he carried himself had shifted, not entirely for the worse. Some people, when they lose in a way they didn't see coming, go mean. Some go quiet and thoughtful. Hutchinson went quiet and thoughtful. This does not make him a hero, but it made him a man who could eventually learn something. Mercer came out of his office eventually. He walked to the front desk. He took out a membership card, the laminated kind with the Irongate logo, and he wrote Taryn's name on it in blue pen, slightly crooked, and he set it on the counter without a word and went back to whatever he was doing. Bev Hollis watched this from across the room. She said quietly, to no one in particular, "Well, what I haven't told you yet, what Mercer did not know, what Pruitt did not know, what no one in that building knew until it came out 3 weeks later, is that Jonah Mercer had been applying for a renewal of his gym's certification from the State Athletic Commission. Part of that application required character references, and part of that process involved a routine background check, and that background check turned up something that had been buried for 11 years. Mercer had, during his time as a youth combatives coach in his early career, fabricated competition credentials that he'd used to secure a coaching contract with a military-affiliated youth program. He had listed championships he didn't win and certifications he didn't hold, and an affiliation with a Brazilian academy that, when contacted, had no record of him. He had built Irongate on a story, and the story had gaps in it. The commission investigator who pulled the file was a man named Gerald Oates, who had been doing this job for 16 years, and had the energy of a man doing it for 60. He was, by every account, thorough. He referred the matter to the district attorney's office, specifically the section that handled fraud related to state-licensed entities and federally affiliated programs. Because the youth program Mercer had contracted with had received DOD funding, which changed the category of the offense. The name of the prosecutor assigned to the case was Adrienne Fells. She was 34 years old, had gone to Vanderbilt Law on a partial scholarship, and had been quietly building a reputation in the DA's office as the person you assigned when you wanted something done correctly and without drama. She looked at the file for about 40 minutes and then called Gerald Oates and said, "How solid is this?" He said, "Very." Mercer was indicted 8 weeks after Taryn Osei-Bonsu walked through his door. The charges included fraud, misrepresentation to a state licensing body, and federal program fraud, the last one carrying the most weight, given the DOD funding. His attorney, a man who operated out of an office in a strip mall and had a fern that needed watering, advised him to cooperate. The cooperation did not prevent consequences. It mitigated them slightly. The outcome: Mercer pled guilty to 2 of the 3 charges. He was sentenced to 4 years, suspended to 18 months with 3 years probation, required to pay back every dollar he'd received under the fraudulent credentials, a number that turned out to be significantly larger than anyone had initially estimated, and permanently barred from holding a state coaching license. Irongate closed. The lease was up in September anyway. Davis Pruitt took over the space 6 months later. He renamed it, got legitimate credentials, and, this is the part worth noting, hired 2 women as coaches in the first year. He wasn't a hero for doing it. It was the minimum. But he did it. Leo Hutchinson moved to Nashville, began training at a well-regarded gym there, and eventually, years later, in an interview with a small MMA publication, described that Wednesday morning in Clarksville as the day he understood the difference between confidence and arrogance, a distinction he said he wished he'd learned from a book, but apparently needed to learn the harder way. He didn't name Taryn in the interview, but anyone who was there knew who he was talking about. Bev Hollis trained for another 3 years and earned her blue belt under a coach who actually deserved to give it to her. And Taryn Osei-Bonsu? She trained. She found a gym in Nashville that didn't make her prove herself at the door, where the owner looked at her application, looked at her background, and said, "Yeah, we'd love to have you." She competed in her first regional tournament 8 months later, went 3-1, and spent the drive home eating a breakfast burrito and listening to a playlist her brother had made her, which was mostly early 2000s R&B and one Rage Against the Machine song that she had never asked him to explain. She didn't follow the Mercer case closely. She knew the outcome because her brother texted her the article with 3 words: "Justice is real." She sent back a thumbs-up emoji and then went back to watching film of her upcoming opponent. She has never, as far as anyone knows, told this story herself. She doesn't think of it as a story. She thinks of it as a Wednesday. But the people who were in that gym, the ones who watched her step onto the mat with 60 borrowed dollars in her pocket and 6 years of something she'd never fully left behind, they remember it differently. They remember the silence after Mercer hit the mat. They remember Bev Hollis starting to clap. They remember the specific quality of the light in that warehouse, mid-morning, coming through the high windows, the way it fell across the blue mats and the red rash guards, and the woman, standing in the center of it all with a water bottle and absolutely nothing to prove. Some rooms change you. Some mornings are the hinge that the rest of your life swings on. For Jonah Mercer, that Wednesday was an ending. For Taryn Osei-Bonsu, it was barely a beginning.